Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a pretty important episode of the Chadcast. This is episode 32, and I am joined with Bryan Gottlieb, who is a designer or developer, I guess, kind of both for Flesh and Blood.
Both, yeah, both.
Both,
I
yeah.
think if we want to get like specific, we have very recently solidified my titles. I believe I am a senior game designer and a lead game developer are my two titles.
Okay, yeah. So you're one of the big names. You're kind of the Mark Rosewater of Flesh and Blood, then I take it.
I just like so much comes from James that I hesitate to ever take on that mantle because like when I think of Mark Rosewater, like he's the guy, right? Like he's the person front and center. That will always be James with Flesh and Blood, and I don't want to steal any of that thunder. But if I could be his like second or third guy, that sounds like a very happy place for me to be.
Man, it gives me actually a lot of hope when you say that, though, when you say that James is the one at the head, because having two people, not only having you, obviously, you absolutely clearly love Flesh and Blood and want to do the best with the game you possibly can, but then also having the creator of the game who's leading it and not planning on stepping down anytime soon kind of tells you that, like, the passion is going to stay there in the game for quite a while to come.
Oh, I'll do you better than that. It's literal everyone at the company. Like it's not just like the very top edges. It's, down through every single developer I work with, every single like every single job you can think of, OP organizer, chief financial officer. Like there's so much love for what we do throughout the company. And I hope that does shine through in everything we do.
I think it does. I don't think everybody on Twitter maybe sees it, but for me, it's coming from Magic the Gathering and even Yu-Gi-Oh! With like when you have the big kind of nameless companies or faceless, I guess, companies, and they just everything is profit driven. Then you come to a game like Flesh and Blood, and it's so easy to just appreciate that every decision seems to be made to better the product and the experience rather than just make money. Now, mind you, the money obviously follows a really good product and giving people what it is that they want. But do you think though that like I'm going to assume that the hiring process, maybe you're not even remotely a part of it, but I'm going to assume like trying to find people who will actually be passionate about the game and aren't just looking for a job. Like I imagine it makes the hiring process a little more difficult.
It does. It certainly does. But I will also tell you that like sometimes you just need to find people with a very particular set of skills, and you can't necessarily mandate that they have that passion to come into it. When you're thinking about roles that aren't really related, obviously like design type roles I'm not talking about, but if you need an HR manager, say, and you need to hire someone, you need someone who just has that type of experience. But what's really interesting is that our culture is so like flesh and blood obsessed, and we're all so in love with it that these people join the company and you find them falling in love very quickly too. And there's so many games like when you walk around our studio of flesh and blood being played all the time. And it's not just like developers versus developers. It's like, oh, here's HR versus OP, and then here's an accountant playing. Like it's just everyone is so infected with this love for flesh and blood,
Have you
and it's very inspiring.
Have you guys ever thought about? I mean, I assume there's areas of the and stuff that you can't show anybody, obviously, because when you're on the inside. But have you guys ever thought about like recording a little bit of just like going around and seeing people play games and making like videos out of that of just like different cuts and things, and you like walk up to two whoever the employees are playing and you kind of show how much fun everybody has. Have you ever thought about like showing a bit more behind the scenes?
Yeah, I think you're gonna see a bit more behind the scenes stuff as time goes on. We're kind of doing some stuff in regards to just organization and getting people in the right places and upgrading our facilities. That is very much in full swing now, and it will be completed very soon. And once that happens, I think you'll see us open the doors a little bit and show people a little bit more how things work behind the scenes.
Okay, that sounds really fun because I really enjoyed the video of the shredding of the gold tunics and the whole fallout that happened with that. I found that to
Yeah, me
be
too. Other
that
people
was
didn't enjoy that so much, but I enjoyed it.
I had a blast with that because it just I know that there was a lot of people. I think the biggest argument against it was like, oh, the optics. The optics are really bad. And it's like I actually personally disagree because like the kind of person, especially on Twitter, because that's specifically where all this was kind of that was where all the negative attention was. The kind of person who sees that and just immediately hates it, it's like that's not somebody you want involving themselves in the game in the first place because they're not going to like they're clearly like they're not going to appreciate what's here. They just get angry at the first thing they see. So it's like I'm fine with filtering out like the angriest people on Twitter. It's a tiny portion of the population, anyways.
Yeah, I understand that take on it, and part of me does agree with it. I think one of the things we could have done better, like you have to take your audience as you find it, right?
Mhm.
And knowing what Twitter is and knowing what like these very impassioned hobby spaces are like, it was probably a little bit more predictable that we might get that kind of response. In retrospect and thinking about it, like we could have anticipated that a little better. And I think we could have just said what was going on a little bit more clearly. Like we could have
Mhm.
done a little intro in the video and said, like, look, these are not, this is not just creating scarcity. This is enforcing a promise we made to players that we would only distribute these at certain events. We printed too many. We didn't know the level of events, but now that those events are definitely not happening anymore, they're over. We got to keep that promise. These are being shredded for that reason. And I just don't think like that was clear enough. Certainly, the context was there if you wanted to go look for it, and people were willing to explain that. But when you know how Twitter works and you know that nobody's going to go look for context, it was somewhat more predictable, and we could have set ourselves up a little bit better with that. But you live and you learn, and
Mhm.
I don't regret it because I know we did the right thing there. Like it was just keeping a promise, and that
Mhm.
was 100% the right thing to do. It's nice to have a little transparency and show people that we're actually doing what we said. So I think the right people appreciated that.
Absolutely, yeah. Because I didn't really see any flesh and blood players who were upset. Everybody seemed to be on the same page. But I think I agree with what you say there when you mention like just how you like just explaining what you're doing a little bit better. Because I've had to learn that the hard way. If you assume
Yeah.
everybody in the audience knows what you're talking about, and then they don't, everything can get misconstrued. Because that's really what seemed to be happening there. Once
Oh
people
yeah.
did have it explained to them, some people still were like, "Oh, this is still really bad." Because I think once you make someone angry, it's almost impossible to convince them
Yes.
otherwise, right? So it's like you've
Yes.
already lost them. But there was a couple people who are like, "Oh, okay, I don't really agree with it, but I understand what they're doing." But I mean, hey, it got a lot more eyes on the game, and I think that's also a positive thing because most people probably watched the video, shrugged, and then went along their day, right? Like they didn't really do much with it.
Yeah, it's this weird thing where like once the anger machine starts rolling, everyone sort of feels obligated to have a take on it. So you can get like some splash damage that way. And like to your point, it's really easy to forget the eccentricities of the platform you're operating on. Like I have been on Twitter for Jesus, too long now, probably maybe it's been like 15 years.
Oh
I don't even know when
God,
Twitter launched, but it's been a very long time.
you've been on Twitter
And
since it was Twitter.
yeah, yeah, for a very, very long time, from nearly the outset, and I've cultivated, a pretty large following there. And you would think I should know how this stuff works by now, but every now and then I'll fire off like a half context comment, and it's just immediately taken in the worst way possible, and that's on me. I should know this shit. Like I know how this goes at this point.
Hey, you know what? Honestly, I'm okay with you in the way that you tweet. I have really enjoyed some of the stuff you put out there. You made a very recent tweet about other games and hoping that people, play these other games, they get involved with the space from it, but then they find out that our game is the best game, I believe is what you had said, and move over here. I also really enjoyed your tweets at Hoogland. I'm not gonna lie, that was also an absolute riot. Very.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I don't think I handled that in the right way. Like, I do know I came from it from a very genuine place of like wanting to protect my coworkers, and I felt like he was taking an unfair shot at many, many people who invested a lot of effort in creating what we care about so passionately, and is 100% designed to be a great game above everything else in the entire world. And I obviously like I have a lot of passion when it comes to this. I have somewhat of a short fuse, like I'll own that up. But I know what happens when you get down into the murk and mire and like you start throwing shit at people. It just nothing good comes of it. And it's that same thing where like if you know me and you know the type of person I am and you know flesh and blood, you know how devoted we are to serving our fans, to making a great product, to not just I think like like what he said was something like a loot box first and a
Mhm.
game second to 100% not be that. If you know all this information, then my response looks pretty reasonable. If it's just my response in a vacuum, I look like a huge asshole, and like I need to recognize that. And I think I just could have handled it better, frankly.
I mean, I will argue a little bit against that. I think Hoogland's got enough of a reputation that most people seeing your tweet probably already assume that he's in the wrong, because he's not exactly the most liked person on the internet. I
Yeah,
guess,
but that's
yeah, from the
I think like
perspective.
that may be true,
Mhm.
but even if that's true, I think there is a burden on me to be better than that. Like it's if that is true, then I'm punching down, right? I'm taking an easy target and I'm like throwing more shade at them where they're already inclined to garner that shade from a bunch of people, and that's shitty of me to do. So, like, whatever circumstance is true about that, I don't think I come out ahead by participating in it. Sometimes you just like turn the other cheek, or if I really wanted to speak about it, I should have spoke about it to my people. I should have spoke about it directly and just completely left him out of the equation. That would have been the appropriate way to handle it, I think.
I guess like from the perspective of you are actually like a designer. You work for LSS. You're part of the team. So from you to be responding that way, I do understand like you obviously have much more of a burden of responsibility. From the perspective of just one guy on Twitter talking shit to another guy, I'm not gonna lie, I find that stuff very entertaining to sit back and watch the shit show. I think a lot of people would agree drama is always entertaining, but I do agree from the fact that you actually work for the company that you probably just have to learn the same as even myself being a content creator that sometimes you have to conduct yourself in a much better manner than you might want to in the moment.
Yep.
Anger
Yeah, I
is.
just I just know we do great work, and I don't
Mhm.
have to get into that. Like I know what we produce. I know how hard we work on it, how much we care about the game. And like when you know that stuff, you don't have to fight every battle. Like you can just internalize that and be like, well, here's someone who just like doesn't get it. And that's fine. A lot of people aren't going to get it. And if I, spent all my time yelling at people who didn't like Flesh and Blood, I'd be hoarse. Like there's plenty of people out there that don't like Flesh and Blood. I think they're incorrect. I think like if they gave the game a fair chance, we could very much make them come around to it, but they do exist and that's fine. I have to accept that.
Mhm. So speaking of other games, do you think Disney Lorcana is going to kill Flesh and Blood?
Absolutely not. There's plenty of space in this industry for many, many, many games. I hope Lorcana has a ton of success, frankly, because they're tapping into an audience that, may not have had interest in TCGs.
Mhm.
They might engage with TCGs for the first time through Lorcana and say to themselves, well, I like this, but maybe this game's a little thin. It doesn't have the strategic depth I'm looking for. What else is out there? What other options are there? And then they come find Flesh and Blood. That sounds great to me. I mean, look, even if in the short term some Flesh and Blood players wanted to go play Lorcana for a while, great, go do that.
Yeah.
We'll be here. We'll keep making Flesh and Blood cards. We'll keep making the game great. And then when you've had your Lorcana fill, you come back and play Flesh and Blood. I bought Lorcana cards this weekend. I'm gonna play it with my wife. I think it'll be cool. I want to check it out. I want to see how their game mechanics are. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. There's so much room in this market for TCGs, and
Mhm.
I think especially when they're pointing in very different directions than what you're doing. And so I love seeing the Lorcanas. I love seeing the One Pieces, like all these IPs, particularly with existing IPs that can potentially bring in new groups to TCGs. Hell yeah, bring them in. TCGs are the best thing in my life besides my wife. Like literally nothing has contributed as much to my happiness, to my existence as TCGs, and I want everyone to experience that. So the more people who are getting that, awesome. Let it happen.
I fully agree. There is a lot of reasons that for certain games that I won't play them or I don't like them. One Piece has actually very much been impressing me. I wasn't really enthused with the cards when they first came out because they just looked kind of corporate lazy, like we're gonna cut corners and just put like anime panels or manga panels or whatever. But then some of their like secret rares and the stuff they actually get like artists to illustrate, oh, they are really nice looking cards. But I
Yeah,
agree
I think it's a
there's
cool game.
there's this sentiment that oh, Flesh and Blood is too expensive, and then Lorcana is competing. It's going to be hopefully cheap once they print a ton of product. One Piece is cheap, Digimon's cheap, Pokemon's cheap, but the thing about a lot of these games is, as you said, they lack a lot of the depth that a game like Magic or Flesh and Blood has. And the benefit to Flesh and Blood is that it doesn't play like Magic. Because I think an issue with card games is that everybody has it in their head that there's the big three, and then everything else is like scraps, it survives for a few years and then dies out. And I think we're seeing a new era of trading card games where more are going to be able to exist because the the fan base of card games itself has grown. I've been really thinking about card games and how they compare to video games a lot lately, because we kind of treat all card games as the same thing, whereas like they're all kind of different genres and styles of game. Pokemon is not at all like Flesh and Blood, is not at all like Yu-Gi-Oh. In terms of how they all play, and even a lot of their structure, although there are similarities. That'd be like saying Dark Souls is the same thing as Stardew Valley. It's like the only thing they really have in common is that, well, I mean, there's weapons in both and they're video games, but aside from that, they're very different things. And so I just get a chuckle whenever I hear people say like, "Oh, Lorcana's coming out, like Flesh and Blood. They need to step it up, or the game's gonna die." But as you said, it's like they bring more people in, but they're at opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of what they offer to players.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly, and it's also really funny too. And I understand where this comes from. I think that in the TCG market, there is this just eternally persistent narrative that a game is always about to die. And it's not just Flesh and Blood. It's every game, man. If you've been in this space for long enough, like I have, almost 30 years now of playing TCGs, and you have seen all of these discussions. I can't tell you how many times Magic was going to die. I can't tell you how many times Yu-Gi-Oh was going to die, how many times Pokemon was going to die. All these games are doing absolutely great. And but along the way, a lot of games did die. So when you say this a lot, you're occasionally correct. And it just like every time there's a Flesh and Blood event that drew like five fewer people than the last one, it's like, oh, game is dying. Man, I see the numbers. Flesh and Blood is not dying. Flesh and Blood is growing rapidly in a lot of places. And like even anecdotally, I hear a lot like, "Oh, my store isn't firing events anymore." And then I'll go and check out information in the region, and well, yeah, maybe this store is trending down a little bit, but three more stores in that area picked up the game, and they all have this growing player base. It's just like people always want to take very small anecdotal things and extrapolate them to, oh, this game is not doing as well as it was, as well as it could be. I mean, I'll just tell you right now, Flesh and Blood is doing great. We're really happy with the growth we've seen in so many places, and it seems to only be continuing and accelerating. So I would not worry about Lorcana. I'm really excited for Lorcana, actually.
Yeah, I personally am not a huge Disney fan, and so I have zero interest in Lorcana. Maybe if somebody ever wanted me to play a game with them to try it, I would, but I'm probably not going to buy anything myself. Um, but yeah, I would just say, I guess I would just say to anybody that's worried, like, because I understand the feeling of the game, being worried that the game is dying or there's a threat to it, especially if your LGS is slowing down. Because actually, the one here in town for me has been struggling to get numbers, partly because, like we'd have on average like 8 to 10 people, but a few of them now are working Fridays. They just aren't able to make it out anymore. A couple people have fallen out of the game, which happens. We've only managed to get one new person, and then a couple are taking a break. So we've been struggling to fire. But part of the problem has been that we just ran CC for like 3 4 months in a row with nothing really else in between, except for maybe like a draft for a new set. And so we really didn't, put the effort into getting new players. And I feel like some stores, like sometimes it's just circumstances, but I do feel like a lot of stores it's maybe a lack of effort, or you're not running the right events, or just the people that you've gotten to come in, life changes for them. So for now, because the game is smaller than games like Magic or Yu-Gi-Oh, there's just not as many players, but the players who do play are very devoted. Although as you had just demonstrated, it is growing. But I can understand that a store slows down. But like I've also seen this for Magic, I've seen this for Yu-Gi-Oh. Like my LGS here, Flesh and Blood slowing down, but Yu-Gi-Oh has picked up recently, and I think
Mm.
that if your store is starting to fall off, just maybe try tweaking a few things, run some new player events, and it might just be a matter of like just when the next set comes out or the set after that, that might be what revitalizes your scene. Because some people I think just need a break. Not everybody's going to get so hardcore into a game and they just want to go off and play something else for a few months.
No, absolutely. And things ebb and flow. The type of product we're making at a given moment can change. Like sometimes our product's going to be very geared towards existing players and serving them. And I think, Dusk Till Dawn sort of falls under that category, right? Anytime you have like a non-draftable product, a product that is somewhat supplementary to existing stuff. It isn't really a great new player onboarding product, but we have some things coming down the pipeline that are outstanding for new players. Some new things like our collaboration with Tolarian Community College. That's just completely different than anything we've done before, and all of these things could be the thing that really uh, pushes Flesh and Blood in your locality up to the stratosphere and get your armories absolutely humming again. And it's just exactly what you described. Like, you know, the area I'm in used to have such a devoted, hardcore tournament grinder Magic the Gathering scene. I'm telling you, we would have FNMs with just top-notch Pro Tour players, and we'd get 40 people to an FNM, and there were four different FNMs around town, and they were all getting like 15, 10 people, 20 people, but this hardcore, really intense tournament one with nice prizes, and the best players would always get like 30, 40 people. And that was just a given. It happened week in and week out. You couldn't fire a competitive tournament in this region now. Like they have RCQs now for Magic, and they get like 10 people, 12 people, and that's to qualify for something. And I'm telling you, if you just go back a few years, we were playing 40-person FNMs just for nothing, for mid stakes. And does that mean Magic is dying? Absolutely not. Not even close. It just means like the texture of the game has changed, the way people are playing it has changed, and I think people should consider the possibility that Flesh and Blood is actually succeeding in some ways at stepping away from the tournament scene and creating more of these other opportunities to play. And it's something we do care deeply about. And I think you're going to see that when we come to this Tolarian Community College set.
Yeah, so is it safe to say then, I mean, maybe you can't reveal this because it hasn't officially been labeled. It is a UPF product. Like what it seems to be. It's you take it, you sit down with your friends and you just play a multiplayer game together. Is that what
You're gonna have all the clarity you need very soon. I
Okay,
promise.
okay. You can't give me any spicy
I
details,
can't
but
I can't give any spicy details,
is
but very soon you're gonna understand exactly what this product is and why we're so excited about it.
okay, I'm looking forward to it. I think too, one of the things, and I absolutely love what you guys are doing here, is that you're clearly, and you had mentioned this in the last couple interviews that you had done, which is one of the reasons I wanted to get you on here after listening to you, is that you're looking to shake up what people expect from the game. And the next set, Bright Lights, is I am just so excited for the idea of a single class set that even though I'm not like the biggest, I like mech, but it's not my favorite class. Like, even though I'm not the biggest fan, the idea of playing 4 pack sealed, or even the buy 3 packs and just crack them and play, I am exceptionally excited for that, because a format that I've really come to enjoy is sealed blitz precons, and I feel like the just take 3 packs and or four for a steel deck, or 3 packs and mash them together, makes a very affordable way for people to get a similar experience of that, but with a newer set. Because you just take the 3 packs, there's your deck. It's basically the same as buying a blitz precon, and you get this like kind of underpowered, thing to use, but it's a much more balanced experience for all players.
Yeah, look, the Blitz precons are something I've worked intensely on. I had a huge uh, point of focus on that when I first started with the company. It was something I was very passionate about, that we had to improve. They had to get better. They had to be a way that new players could actually engage with Flesh and Blood for the first time. And I've heard so many awesome stories of like this past Armory season, and I think it was out in California. I heard a story of like a 32-person blitz precon arm skirmish event, and like how awesome is that to get 32 people in and playing under that new set of rules, that new format, and a way that everyone can step in on even footing, and that the games were pretty good. Like I saw some complaints about some decks being overpowered, but it was really funny. I saw a different deck being complained about being overpowered every time. So I'm like, well, I don't actually know what to take away from that. I heard it about Dash. I heard it about Bravo. I occasionally heard it about Kano, just all these different decks that were supposed to be too good in the HP1 Blitz deck format. But it seems like people had a really good time with it. And it is just really important to me that we keep finding good ways to meet the players where they are, give them different experiences. And Bright Lights is very much an example of that. And I keep saying, like, if we were just ranking classes in terms of how much I am a fan of them, Mechanologist would be fairly low on my list. I will be frank about that. But also, Mechanologist after Bright Lights is not the same class as it was before Bright Lights. And I hope that's just obvious facially. Like, we weren't just going to put dash cards in a set and then you go play with them. Like, there's going to be something very interesting going on here. And like you said, it's just about shattering expectations and doing something different. And I don't know if anyone has quite wrapped their head around what it means for a set to be all one class and how that actually works. And I'm really looking forward to people getting to find that out.
Yeah, I am. I'm glad that you guys keep throwing curveballs, and it's not just the same thing to come to expect set after set after set. Because even though there will be new cards and new themes, I think that can kind of get boring, especially if because Flesh and Blood is a hero based game, and we don't really have. I mean, we have Living Legend, but there's no like standard rotation. So like if you play a deck that you just love and you don't have any care to build anything else, when a new set comes out, you might not want to build anything that's in it. So, um, I feel like I just lost my train of thought. I've been doing that a lot lately. I need to get more sleep.
I understand, man. It's just getting old. That's
Yes.
all. I got bad news for you. It only gets worse. Like
Yes.
I don't know how old you are. You look like a young dude. I am now 40,
Oh,
and I just deteriorate on a daily basis. Like
yeah.
I literally will wake up one day and I won't be able to say words anymore. I'm very confident of that.
Yeah, I'm only 27, but I find it's difficult when I do these in the afternoon. You can kind of see it in the video. The sun comes straight through, so this room heats up a lot, and so I'm just kind of sitting here sweating, and then like I just like have the thought of how hot I am, and then it kicks all other thoughts out of my
Just
head for
breaks
the
your brain. Yep, that
yeah, it
makes
does.
sense.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm not really sure where I was going with that. Kind of something about like just appreciating that there's new things every set, so it gives like in franchise players at least a reason to try it. Like the fact that there's equipment in the decks, it seems like we're getting just full on mechs with this next set. Actually, I wanted to ask you, do you? Because I feel this way. Do you feel like Metrics kind of doesn't thematically fit with the rest of Wraith?
That's a really interesting question. I think the answer is yes, but also I don't think a lot of places on Earth fit thematically with Earth. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like if you go to various places around the globe, like we have this very westernized, like quote unquote first world mindset
Mm.
where we just tend to perceive the world as we experience it, as we live it. But there are places all over the globe that have such different levels of technology, of experiences. I mean, you could even go to like remote peoples who have never been contacted by the outside world. That is a very real thing that exists on Earth. So why does every part of Wraith have to be exactly the same level of technology, exactly the same types of people? Like we accept the fact that there's these big green hulking beasts like Reinar walking around and doing things, but it's weird when there's a gun or a steam engine or some kind of laser technology. Like all that's where we have this kind of discordance. And I think what it's actually all about is just the world of Wraith has evolved much like the world of Earth with very different levels of culture, technology, and just ways of experiencing the world. And I think that's really cool. Like you could do some weird stuff where you're like, oh, there's a multiverse and we go from plane to plane. Not to like pick on how magic does things, but like you basically do want an infinite canvas, right? You want to show all these things so long as you can justify these things interacting with each other. And I think that's the key thing. It's just there's got to be a little bit more flow between these different zones of Wraith. And you will see that over time. Absolutely, these zones will overlap a little bit more. But if you do take something like metrics and contrast it to the Savage Lands, they're very, very different places. But if I took somewhere like New York City and contrasted it with Antarctica, like those are very different places. That is kind of how worlds work. So that is a long-winded way of saying I think it's a good thing to identify, but I'm also cool with it, and it really doesn't bother me at all.
Yeah, oh yeah, to be clear, I'm okay with that. I like metrics. I like the theme. It just when you compare it to the kind of high fantasy wizards and warriors that most of Flesh and Blood falls under, the kind of high tech stuff just it is a little I guess the juxtaposition is a little jarring, I guess is the only way
Yep.
to say it. But it's not a bad thing. I like metrics. I actually think the mech stuff looks cool. I think the only issue is like wrapping your head around the idea of like, okay, I'm playing mech, my opponent's playing brute. How the hell is Reinhardt gonna like punch this giant mech and actually beat it? Like, I guess there's that kind of cognitive dissonance,
Muscles,
but
muscles,
yeah,
bro. He's got big muscles, and you can punch anything. Have you ever seen the Hulk before?
that's
The
true.
Hulk can
Yeah.
punch stuff, right? Like if you're big enough and strong enough, you can punch a mech. You can punch a god if you want to. So
That's true. You can punch giant angels and just shatter them instantly. Same with
why
dragons. So
not?
I mean, yeah,
Why not?
that's okay. You've got me completely convinced there.
It's just like we kind of set the terms of these fantasy universes,
Mhm.
and it's always arbitrary where we draw the lines, and that's fine. Like we can all find our own lines to be like, that doesn't work for me. It does work for me. We're all gonna have different thresholds for that, and like, growing up, Marvel comics were just absolutely everything to me. Like I love those worlds. I loved everything about them. And then at some point in this cinematic universe, I was just like, this is so stupid at this point. Like it just doesn't work for me anymore.
Mhm.
But like for years, it was something that worked for me, and I had all that willingness to suspend my disbelief. And we've all just got to find our own lines. And I do think the place of metrics in the world of Wraith absolutely works, and I think you're going to see more and more of that over time. Why it works.
I'm glad to hear that because I like metrics. That's the thing. I think it's really cool. I like its kind of I like how it works with the pits where the runoff from the metrics kind of goes into there and makes the whole place like a toxic wasteland. I think that's a really cool. I can't remember what the place is called. It's been years. I never beat the game, but it reminds me a little bit of the one town in Dark Souls. You go like underground and it's the poison area. I know somebody's gonna type it
Mm,
out in the comments. Um,
yeah, I can't remember
yeah,
either.
but you kind of know what I'm talking about. Where like that's how the pits feels to me. Which is, I'll be honest with you, the pits is not my favorite place in Wraith, but obviously that's fine because we have so many places to appreciate, and not every theme is going to be your thing. Do you think
Yep.
we're ever going to in the future? And I'm talking like years down the line. Like I imagine that if you've covered everything in Wraith and you're starting to run out of room to like fit things in. I imagine it's like, well, you could always hop on a boat and or on an air gondola or something and travel to another continent, and then the story, it's kind of like Magic's multiverses where you can just have a quick easy, kind of story way to write a whole new area into the story and then expand the game even more so.
Yeah, I will tell you, I think there is a very defined, fully realized world of Wraith within James's head. I
Mhm.
think he knows exactly its limits. I think he knows exactly what places we have not seen. I think there are many, many, many of those places. I think the idea that we would need to like hack them and create a new multiverse, I don't really buy that. It just seems like there's still so much to explore. Um, but that being said, maybe. I mean, you never know where the story takes you, and that is something that is a question much more suited for him.
Mhm.
But I will tell you that there is so much about Wraith that the general public does not know yet, and I think we are a very long way away from having to expand it in sort of weird ways. And like you can even just think about places in Wraith that we've seen very little of thus far, like things we've only dabbled in along the way. Like they're very much out there, and at some point they will certainly be slated for full exploration. Um, and yeah, it's just such a deep, like James did the legwork before he came to the table with this TCG. All this stuff is
Mhm.
out there. It's in his head. It's in, you know, hundreds and hundreds of vision documents for various things, and I'm not concerned that we're anywhere near the end of things to explore.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no. This was just kind of like a hypothetical in the future. No, I you can tell that, and I think this is why Flesh and Blood has done such a good job of growing better than most TCGs. Like it was the one that brought in the TCG boom again, where like it was the game that did really well, that broke past all expectations, and a bunch of other games started to follow on Kickstarter and everything. And it's because like James, he maybe I'm going a bit too far here. Maybe I'm not. Maybe it's not far enough. But I would akin what he's done with Flesh and Blood almost to what Tolkien did with Lord of the Rings, where he's built his own world, his own lore, his own characters. Like obviously there's teams working on it. It's not just him anymore. I imagine there's input from other people when he's developing things. But it really feels like he's created like a whole entity here, and it's so deep, like even not even in just the world itself, but like who is Fiendal, who is Ophidia? Like, why is it a giant deep sea creature? Is it something else? Are they the Aesir? Are they these ancient entities? Like, was Fiandal a woman because you got her spring tunic? Like, there's all these questions about all these little things in the lore, and it's just I'm so excited to learn more as time goes on. I personally cannot wait, and I hope that your team or somebody eventually one day starts writing novels because I would love to be able to read like actual full-on stories in this world. And I think a
So
lot of other
I'm
people.
gonna reveal something to you that
Okay.
I have never I don't think I've ever revealed this anywhere else. But you said the right combination of words that makes me want to tell this story, so I'm willing to tell it. I went with James to Hobbiton in New Zealand. One of the times I was there, we went together. And if you don't know what Hobbiton is, that is where they shot the Lord of the Rings movies. It's a very famous tourist spot in New Zealand. And he absolutely said to me, "Man, wouldn't it be awesome if someday we could do something like this with the world of Rathe?" I mean, you're just spot on that is his vision. Like it is that encompassing. And I really do believe sky is the limit because the groundwork is laid. Like it is a full fleshed out world, and we're going to keep exploring around it.
I am over the moon to hear that. I'm sure everybody else is too because it just when I first found Flesh, like I knew about Flesh and Blood when it came out, but I didn't give it much attention because at the time I was happy with Magic. I had no reason
Yeah,
to
same.
try out new games. But
Yep.
when I started to become unhappy with Magic, was looking around. The professor had his spoiler card for the librarian, but it wasn't even in that. It was a video where he was talking about Strixhaven and mentioned that he didn't get a spoiler card for the upcoming Wizard School set, which he was clearly a bit miffed about. He's like, but I got a librarian spoiler. And then I just was like, okay, well, I'll give Flesh and Blood another look. I'm like, I forgot the game existed. And very quickly, I could tell that there was something deeper there. I've talked about this a little bit on the podcast and my own channel, I think a bit. But I used to write stories as a kid. I wanted to be an author. I always built these fantasy worlds. I would draw maps out. Like I was a kid. Like I stopped, when I was 20, but so most of the stuff is absolute garbage when you go back to look at it. But like that was something that consumed me as well. I used to like draw pictures of different weapons that I'd come up with and all this other stuff. I'd write like I'd literally do the character pronunciations and everything. So when I came to Flesh and Blood and I was looking through like articles and even just seeing how much care went into designing just the borders of each class card, like how they used the Kadachi for the ninjas, and just all the attention to detail. It really started to feel the same way that I used to go about things, where you just create all this stuff for the world and you just keep making it deeper and deeper and deeper. And that's when I kind of knew that there was something very special here. And I think that quality is what's gripped so many people to do so many good things for the game, even at the expense to themselves. Like, I don't see for a lot of other card games, like for instance, not to pick on it, but like I don't see anybody like Mansant, going out of their way to do streaming for MetaZoo and coming out of their own pocket and putting all that stress on their own shoulders just to bring the game to the player base, right? Like it's something that has to be really, really high quality to make people want to do that for something.
No, the type of passion and love this game has engendered thus far is, I think most, I won't even say TCGs. I think just like most other things are that's like the gold mine, and I don't mean that in a money way. I mean that in a invested player, invested community type way, where they're just entirely bought into this world. They love everything about it from top to bottom, and I do think like it has been deliberate to make a world of enough quality to give people where they could feel comfortable making that kind of relationship and going that deeply. There's this weird thing in TCG spaces where like when you have a TCG you love, you tend to make it your whole personality. Like it just it consumes everything about you. It's who you are on the internet. It's how you spend your weekends. It's where your friend base comes from. And so it almost demands a level of respect and quality to allow you to feel justified in that decision. And that's kind of where Magic broke for me, is like it just started to feel a little cash grabby and a little less about like this passion project and something that was just designed to be something I could put my entire life to and feel comfortable about it. And I think people get that vibe with Flesh and Blood because like I mentioned, there's a team of people who are giving you the same. Like I think about Flesh and Blood every day, all day. I wake up in the morning and put on YouTube to see what event is going on. I do have the Battle Hardened in my second monitor right now, just keeping an eye on it.
Is it Lexi v
I'm
Lexi?
no, it is Briar versus Lexi. We could talk more about Lexi too. I had such an interesting moment of realization about this topic, and I would love to share that as
Yeah.
well. But it's just like we are all doing this thing where we are buying in wholeheartedly and making our personalities and our friend groups and our every waking moment about this thing that we want to passionately create for you. And I think that's what makes people comfortable giving us the same thing back and embracing Flesh and Blood in the same way and letting it be part of their personality and letting it define their friend group. It's just really humbling and awesome to see, honestly.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think Flesh and Blood, it's a game that is like it feels genuinely feels to me, and this is why I want to follow it, is that everybody involved, but especially James, it's like the focus is the money is just a means to an end, right? So many people look at games and go, oh, they're just trying to make money. They just want to, that's all they're doing this for. It's like, no, no, no. There is something like to make an amazing world and a great game is the motivation. That is like the North Star. The money that you need to do that is simply the means to the end. That's the business side of things. But it's nice that because you go to Magic and it's so evident that the people at the top, the people who run Wizards of the Coast, they just it's the money. That's the North Star, is the money. It's how much can we extract from this as quickly as possible until we basically move on to bigger and better jobs and leave the game just its death throes. And that's, you're right, like people have noticed that with Flesh and Blood. It just feels good to say. I'm like, when I go to an LGS and people ask me what game I'm playing, like, oh, is that Magic? I'm like, hell no, it's Flesh and Blood. It's way better.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I often have the same conversation, and yeah, I'm glad that is something that yourself and others have wholeheartedly picked up on.
Yes. So Lexi.
Yeah, yeah. So a really interesting turn of events after a few weeks of Icelander domination. Lexi wins the Battle Harden yesterday and is five of the top eight slots here. Four hero top eight, but there's five Lexis. There's a Briar, there's a Levia, and there's an Icelander. So, odds are we head towards maybe a Lexi mirror in the finals again. That's what we had yesterday. I'm just thinking about it a little bit. And, like, don't get me wrong. I think Lexi is certainly one of the best decks, maybe the best deck in the format. That I would not fault anyone who made that conclusion. I think it's very close between Lexi and Icelander, frankly, but either way you want to throw that one is completely fine with me. But something like a five Lexi top eight, I don't think is actually reflective of the state of the metagame. Because what happens with an event like this PTI event in Atlanta, it's the day after the Battle Harden, 69 players in this event. About 20 of them are some of the best players in the world. The type of people who flew to this event, from the Northeast, from Texas, from wherever their home bases are. I'm talking folks in this top eight, like Michael Fang and Brody Spurlock, who are both playing Lexi in this top eight. Just talented player after talented player on the Lexi side of this top eight. And so in this 69 player event, there were, I believe, 16 Lexis. About 12 of those are piloted by maybe some of the best players in the world, like certainly top 20 players in the world. And they play the games and they win a lot and they beat their opponents and then they all filter to the top. But in a lot of these instances, like Michael Fang, Brody Spurlock, they could pick up Levia, they could pick up Icelander, they could pick up Bravo, and they're going to do really freaking well in this tournament regardless. And they could, honestly, they could pick up Bolton, they could probably pick up freaking Arachne. They are so good at this game, and they are going to go ahead and make a run to these top eights.
New
And
Prism.
yeah, look, one of the things holding back New Prism more than anything else is the Dromai matchup. Did
Absolutely.
you
Yeah.
know what hero I did not mention in this top eight? Like, I legitimately think if you just said, well, I can't beat a Dromai, but here's who I need to beat, I'm going to beat these five Lexis. New Prism can do that. 100%. I have no doubt in my mind New Prism can do that. And maybe that's a path that these incredible, talented players could take. But I get it. Like, they took the flight there, they paid out of pocket, they're paying for a hotel. They would like to break even on the trip. Nobody's trying to get rich playing Fab across the country, but it's nice to break even. And I think they are very justified in choosing Lexi for this event. But I do think it shapes how these metagames are kind of perceived by the public. Is Lexi the best hero? Probably. Is it that dominant where it is supposed to comprise five slots out of this top eight? Does it mean something that it comprised five slots out of this top eight? I think not as much as you would expect at
Mhm.
first blush. I do expect Lexi to be like the most played deck in national season. That seems pretty reasonable to me.
I would
I think
agree.
it's going to have good results, very solid results. Maybe win rate slightly above 50%, right around 50%, something like that makes sense to me. But I think there's a lot of other very viable options for this metagame, and I'm looking forward to see what the players bring to the table.
Yeah, I agree. I think a big part of it too is like that. Well, like one thing with Prism too is she's brand new. Nobody has her really quite figured out yet. All the play lines aren't really solved, and the play style of the deck hasn't really been quite deciphered. Whereas Lexi's had what more than 2 years to be figured out. I know she's gotten new cards and strategies, but there's so much of a wealth of knowledge, and people have had a lot of time to practice. So it's like, yeah, you're gonna take a deck that you is one of the best decks, is maybe an easier deck to pilot, whether it be by the deck itself or that you've just been playing it longer, and everybody's kind of got it figured out. So you're not going to make nearly as many mistakes, and you're going to play more, I guess, the ideal play lines within your hands and such. So all those factors also go into it, and I really like that you point out that so many good players are playing her, which is like that's why she's topping. If they brought something else, you'd probably see a more diverse metagame. But and do you think it would be a bad thing though if she just kind of like sped run into LL and just kind of left same with eyes? Like, do you think that would be the end of the world for the meta if
That's
Lexi was gone?
fine. That's completely fine. I mean, like that's kind of something's always got to be best, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think Lexi has had a pretty healthy run as the best deck right now. She's doing this weird like Oldham thing where she's not closing a lot of tournaments. Like she feels like the focus of the metagame, but she's not
Mm-hmm.
getting those W's. And we saw Oldham do that for a very long time until just all of a sudden things snapped. Oldham got a little hot, won a bunch of events in a row, and sped run their way to Living Legend. And of course, we're coming up on national season. There's a lot of living legend points at stake here. As we mentioned, a lot of great players playing Lexi. I expect she's going to pick up a lot of points, climb that leaderboard pretty quickly, and then we could be looking at a new metagame. And I hope people are really like starting to embrace the idea of the living legend system, adding this slow rotation to the game. And if you don't like Lexi, which some people don't, and I understand that, if you don't like Lexi being the focal point of the metagame, that's cool. I get where you're coming from, but we're marching towards a path where she won't be here any longer. We know that is an inevitability. And I think it's so much more interesting to me to just kind of embrace things as they are, embrace the Lexi experience, challenge yourself to uh, target that deck, figure out good matchups into Lexi, and we've seen that happen along the way. Like we've seen the Azuris pop up to prey on Lexi. We've seen Dromai completely flip the script on that matchup and find a way to challenge Lexi. And I think we're going to see new ways of doing it when we get to national season. So, yeah, I am quite pleased with the current state of the metagame. I think it is often very easy to meme on a metagame if you
Mm-hmm.
want to, like pick out isolated results, isolated occurrences. But this metagame looks good. It's a fun, classic constructed metagame right now.
Yeah, I would agree. I also think that for a lot of people, I mean, if you're around a bunch of LGSs that are very, very competitive, then your local scene might look closer to what the actual meta is because you're probably facing a lot of players that are paying attention and are gonna play the deck that's the best. But I think something else to pay attention to though is Flesh and Blood is very different from other games like Magic, Yu-Gi-Oh, or even Pokemon, where when you, for instance, let's say you net deck the top winning Lexi deck, most players there a lot of good players can pick it up, but there's going to be a lot of players who pick up a deck that maybe just won an event, and unless they have a lot of experience with the hero before, they're not going to be able to play it nearly as well as, let's say, you get into Magic, you build the newest best deck, you figure out, oh, I put this card on the field, this card on the field, they do this interaction, and then this third one boosts the interaction. That's the way to play the deck. It's pretty straightforward, whereas Flesh and Blood is way less straightforward when you have to play with, just the four cards in hands, your ideal lines. You have to think about your blocks, your opponent's value, what's coming up in your deck, what you've pitched, what's left for threats. Like, there's so much more to consider all at once that's just like information that's not in front of you on a table. And so I think that's another thing about Flesh and Blood is, people will complain about not as much. Like, I don't hear it here, but I still hear every once in a while net decking. They'll be like, "Oh, everybody's playing Lexi because she's winning," but it's like nobody is really playing it the same way because your personal play style and skill will make a huge change on how the deck functions in different people's hands. So I think that's something else to pay attention to. So if your LGS is, maybe playing meta, but if there's no great players, you can get away with playing some of these lesser heroes if you don't want to play the meta. Um,
Yeah,
Because that's
I think that's absolutely right, and that's a huge part of like what I was saying previously about these Lexis making up a disproportionate portion of the top eight based on player skill. It is not only the fact that these are very good players picking up this deck, it is the nature of Flesh and Blood itself and the fact that it rewards great technical play, great game planning,
Mhm.
great matchup knowledge. Like all those things are heavily rewarded in Flesh and Blood, and there isn't just the extreme variance of, oh, I didn't get to participate in this game because I didn't draw my third land. That evens a bunch of things out down to those closer ranges of like 60-40, 65-35. Like we can have skill differentials of 80-20 in this game, and it's something that is reflected in these top eights, especially when these very, very elite players are involved.
Absolutely. No, that's the thing I like about Flesh and Blood the most is, and I know you had spoken about increasing variance, which you've already kind of spoken about, so I don't know if you have any extra thoughts on that, but just I like the fact that I'm rewarded for getting better at the game. I've progressed as a player over the past year far more than I thought I would. Turns out when you spend more time with the game and you start to think a bit more deeply, like even that life total video, which I know before we recorded you said you had watched, like that took me a long time of just sitting and really thinking through like a Flesh and Blood game and spending way more time with the idea that like opened up a better perspective even for myself that I didn't have when I started the project. And so I love that as I learn more things, as I figure things out and pay attention while I'm playing, learning that, hey, you probably, one of your best bets with your hands is to never have a floating resource, is to always use everything that you possibly can. And if you don't in your turns, think about the way you've constructed your deck and try and have ways to maximize on that. And just thinking more about these things has improved my skill. Playing the game obviously has improved my skill. And I like that that's very much directly rewarded where I can tangibly tell that I'm getting better when I play my games against people that either were tough for me to beat before or we were equal and I start to pull ahead of them. I enjoy that aspect of Fab exists where you actually get what you put into it.
Yep, and I do too. And I think the only thing I want to say about the variance thing is it's really hard when I do these kind of quick interviews to
Mm-hmm.
capture all the nuance I'm trying to convey. A lot of it can always be broken down into shorter segments, or, I could talk to you about variance in Flesh and Blood for 10 hours if we want to. I mean, I know because I've had these conversations for 10 hours before with the development team, with James. Like, these are just things we talk about a lot, and there's a lot of nuance and a lot of depth to it. And then I try and give like a 2-minute version of it so people can understand what we're thinking. And it doesn't always capture all the nuance. I don't want anyone to think I don't see that as a very positive part of Flesh and Blood. I love how much skill expression that there is. I love how these great players can succeed. All these things are super, super important. It's just critical, though. Like, there's a lot of people who want to play TCGs who are not going to be willing to take kind of the psychic damage to show up to an armory for 6 months and never win a match, which can absolutely happen in this game. That will not happen in something like Magic with a higher variance. You're going to play someone who's completely flooded or completely screwed at some point and beat them, and you're going to get that W. And you're not going to say, oh, that person just didn't play the game, that's why I won. You're just going to be like, I won, I beat this player. Yay, that's as far as you go with it. It doesn't have that same level of self-reflection. And, people engage with these TCGs for all different reasons. I think we have to do a better job of creating very occasional circumstances where players who are not as good will win. That doesn't mean they're supposed to be winning all the time. That doesn't mean we're supposed to throw skill out the window. Like, you're still going to get opportunities to play perfectly. You're still going to need them to get really lucky to overcome you. But like, they have to win sometimes. We cannot ask them to be your beating post forever. They will leave the game, and that will be the end of their experience with Flesh and Blood. Not everyone has that drive to take losses for months and months and get better. And that's all I was really trying to capture with that. And some of that is just creating different formats for those players to play, right? Things like blitz pre-constructed decks where they can go in, everyone has exactly the same level footing, and like, still in that scenario, I think you take Pablo Pintor and Michael Hamilton and you have them play the blitz precon decks against new player with a blitz precon deck. I think they're going to win like 95% of the time. That's just the reality of the game. It may be higher than 95% of the time, but what I'm saying is the game like really that much worse if it's a 90-10 matchup? If they can win 1 out of 10 times, did we destroy the game? Did we take away all the skill expression? I think the answer to that is no, depending on how you do it. As long as you've always got agency, as long as you're always participating in the game, that will always be the key of Flesh and Blood. Variance will never mean I did not play this game. I had no chance in this game. There was nothing I could have done. Variance will mean my opponent drew absolute perfect combinations of hands. My effects were costed as such that I needed to draw a blue on every single turn of the game. I went 3 turns in a row with all red hands. They were able to run me over in that scenario, and I lost. And you can play out of that scenario a huge percentage of the time right now. I would like you to be able to play out of that scenario a little bit less of the time. That's all.
Yeah, no, I think that actually sounds really good. I think of it as like when I play Viscerai, sometimes you draw a hand with all attacks, and it's like, well,
Yep,
okay, there goes all my momentum. I've lost a game because of that. I was putting on the pressure,
of
I was keeping
course.
them at bay, we're both at low life, and then I draw that hand, and I'm like, that's it. I can do one thing with this hand, and all that momentum, all that pressure, and I'm pretty sure it was all reds too. And it's like, so I can like maybe pitch two to grasp and then swing Rosetta, or like it
Yep.
just, and so it does happen, and I think that's okay because again, like you said, as long as it's not a frequent thing, because that's an issue with Magic is land like getting not getting enough or getting too many lands, and especially with the mulligan, like having to put cards like go lesser on cards, like you can just get destroyed, and it is pretty frequent that you have like just games that don't go exactly how you would like them to have because you missed a land drop for 2 turns. Like it happens probably like one out of every maybe 4 or 5 games, and it just feels pretty bad.
What's really funny is that there's several of those heroes that already exist in Flesh and Blood, and I think because they are heroes that exist a little bit lower down the tier rating, we sort of ignore the fact that this happens. Like Viscera is a good example of a hero that can experience that. Azalea, 100%. You ever draw a no arrow hand with Azalea?
Yeah.
Like,
Or do you ever
good luck.
line up red in the ledgers turn after turn after turn, and then just then you high roll
Yep.
them? Same with
And your
Bravo.
opponent doesn't play?
Yeah, Bravo can high roll if you get a crippling crush with a CNC pummel followed and then a spinal crush. Like if you just land those hits turn after turn, you can have a whole game where the opponent barely does anything.
Yep. And
So,
that is not exactly how I want the experience to
mhm.
manifest. Like I think that swings a little bit too far in one direction. And I think the experience of, oh, I didn't draw any arrows swings a little bit far in the other direction. And you kind of need to find a better balance of those two things, which is exactly what I'm talking about when I'm saying let's find a few spots to introduce a little bit more variance into the game. A card like Warmonger's Diplomacy, I think achieves that in
Did you
very meaningful ways.
hey, did
Um,
you even read the card?
I did read that one. I usually don't, but this one had a lot of text, so I figured I'd sit down. I got out my reading glasses, I lit a candle, and I just poured over it. And yeah, I am receptive to feedback on Warmonger's Diplomacy, and certainly I'm not blind to it. I hear it. Very very powerful card. A few like responses to some of the thoughts I've gotten on it. If it's yellow, I think it's unplayable. If it's red, I think it's unplayable. If it blocks for 2, I think it's unplayable. In the right metagames, I think it, as it exists, is unplayable. I think one of the reasons it stands out is so powerful is because there's not a lot of other things in the game that operate under the same set of rules as Warmonger's Diplomacy. So right now, if you're like, well, I need a blue, I would like a 3 block. Well, here's Warmonger's Diplomacy. It's quite good in several matchups. I may as well go with that. Oh, okay, yeah, there's going to be a lot of Warmonger's Diplomacy. What if there was another blue 3 block that did things along the same lines, but targeted a different aspect of the game? Then what if there was another one and another one and another one? You can't just put all these in your deck, right? You're not going to play 15 of these blue 3 blocks. You have, I assume, a strategy you would like to execute on your own. You're not just looking to do reactive things the entire time. So then you start asking yourself, well, what is the metagame right now? What do I have to target? And then one week it is, oh, I have to target this thing. I better bring out my Warmonger's Diplomacy. The next week it's, oh, I have to target this completely separate thing. It's time for this card to occupy this slot. And Warmonger's Diplomacy, I think it's good to look at it as a tool in a non-rotating game, first of all. So the card pool will continue to expand over time. There will be other things that not only fall into the same kind of Warmonger's Diplomacy space, but as your hero expands its options, you're going to have class blue 3 blocks that you're going to have to explore. And maybe they're more related to what you are trying to do in a lot of instances. And we're already seeing like Icelanders move away from Warmonger's diplomacy because its existence is sort of pushing back some other heroes that you'd usually played against. And Lexi has adapted in such a way to play Trench, and they're not really as concerned about Warmonger's diplomacy anymore. And so at that moment, you go, well, I'm an Azalea player from back in the day. Actually, nobody cares about Warmonger's diplomacy anymore. Oh, wait, nobody's prepared for anything my deck can do. It's Azalea time. And that's how you make rotating, flowing metagames. And I think Warmonger's diplomacy in a vacuum is a very critiquable card. And I am open to those critiques. Hope we've established enough trust that people know what we want to do with the game, how we would like to influence the game, and believe we have a goal in mind with Warmonger's diplomacy. Give us some time with it. I have certainly seen people asking for Warmonger's diplomacy bans. I love engaging with ban discussions in good faith, and I think the community comes from a very good place. I think they just want the best games of Flesh and Blood. I think Warmonger's diplomacy is miles from consideration for banning. I'll just put that out there right now. It's not something that I am really looking at right now, and I am surprised how much momentum it's gotten as a card that we should be considering. It seems like it's doing very good things for the game and will continue to do very good things for the game. So there's my Warmonger's diplomacy rant.
Yes. So I know we're going to keep it short. I do have one thing to say on that, and then I do have two quick questions to ask at the end from a couple
Sure.
patrons, if that's okay. But just on
Yeah.
Warmongers quickly. So my next YouTube video that I'm doing is comparing Flesh and Blood to Yu-Gi-Oh! And I actually have to go and re-record a certain section because I have to fix something and add a whole comparison that I completely missed originally. So that's more work. But one of the things that Warmongers reminds me of floodgates in Yu-Gi-Oh! And for those of you who don't know, in Yu-Gi-Oh! Floodgates they're usually traps, but they're also sometimes other abilities like spells and that basically just say you don't get to do this specific thing. So there's a card that's like you can only summon monsters of the same type, and then there's another ones that say you have to have monsters only of different types. You can't have the same, right? And
Yeah.
so the problem though in a game like Yu-Gi-Oh! And the reason these cards are so hated is because if you don't have like a removal spell in hand or like anything that can destroy it, you're just stuck dealing with it. Whereas in Flesh and Blood, I've noticed that the great balancing of a lot of these cards for something like Warmongers is it only lasts a turn. So even if you're playing Viscerai and you're saving that go off turn and they play a Warmongers, it's like, yeah, don't get me wrong. That sucks. Like you just got shut down hard as Viscerai and it feels bad, but at least you have a turn to be like, okay, I take a lesser turn and then I try to swing back on the turn around. It can, if you're at low life and they play it late enough into the game, it can completely hose you and blow you out of the
Sure.
water. But a lot of things in the game can do that too.
Yep.
So
Indisputably. The last time I saw a Azalea in the top 8 of the calling in Birmingham, I believe, I think, I don't remember if it was their winning in or their top 8 match. I don't remember exactly where they fell, but they faced uh, a deck playing Warmonger's Diplomacy. On the Warmonger's Diplomacy turn, the first time they had double Ravenous Rabble, a card that had kind of fallen out of favor in Azalea, but they rebuilt their deck to bring that back in. Basically, long story short, they faced 2 Warmonger's Diplomacies over the course of the game. The card that makes Azalea, quote, unplayable, they won easily. The Warmongers did nothing in either of those scenarios. And I understand, like, yes, the hands lined up in a certain way, but that player built their deck in a different way to account for its presence. They were fortunate and it lined up well. And at the same time, they're benefiting from this narrative that, quote unquote, Azalea is unplayable. So I just think the flow is there. The metagame churning is there. And I urge people to give card like Warmonger's Diplomacy a little bit more time and trust that we are thinking about them in a very uh, fully realized way. We understand the consequences of them. And look, none of that is to say we are impervious to mistakes. Maybe it's a mistake. And if that's true, we'll go back and we'll revisit it. We'll fix it. We're never going to just be like, you're wrong, we're right. You'll play the game like this and shut up and take your medicine. That's not what we do here. Like we will 100% continue to engage with the community. I'm just asking for trust that we do have something in mind with what we're doing with Warmonger's Diplomacy.
I mean, it doesn't seem like it's actually destroyed anything. It feels like people's expectations of it were a lot higher than its actual performance because it does feel like it's a card that you also need to know when to play. It's not always good. Like you said with the Azalea player, they played it and it was like Azalea was like, okay, I don't care, I'll play around it. But I will say, it almost seems, and maybe I'm crazy because this totally doesn't exist in card games. Like this is brand new, but it almost seems like you're saying that when new cards and strategies come out, players need to adjust and change their own decks and strategies to meet them. That just sounds crazy to me.
Seems like a good idea to me.
Yeah,
I would strongly urge folks to at least consider that
yeah.
approach. And to be honest, some of our players really have stuff like Trench coming back to favor and Lexi is such a great example of how players can adapt and that technology can proliferate. And I think that technology exists in other places. You know, Viscera is a hero I love a bunch. I know you do too.
Mhm.
There is like Pummel Vis out there, and I'm not saying Pummel Vis was the optimal way to do things, but if I had to engage with this format and I knew Warmongers was out there, I'm going to ask myself, like, what else can I do? What other angles can I explore? And that was one that immediately came to mind for
Yeah.
me. So
Arknight Ascendancy and Bequest of Aspiana. Somebody will make it work. I don't know if it's me because I'm not good enough at building decks, but somebody should
there's
make that
stuff
work.
out there for
Yeah.
sure, for
No,
sure.
that's yeah, absolutely. I think that one thing I've learned through Flesh and Blood especially because I engaged in Magic and Yu-Gi-Oh online a lot, but being a content creator, I engage with Flesh and Blood differently than I do, especially because I actually have people that follow me and interact with me, so I get to actually have more conversations than I used to. But I'll be honest, and maybe this is just on Twitter. I feel like there's a lot of lazy people in Flesh and Blood. Like I'm just gonna say it. Like it feels like nobody wants to have to actually sit down and think about their deck, think about their strategy. And I don't blame them. Most people engage with this game. It's a hard game to play. Most of us just engage with it as a casual hobby. So you just kind of wait for the pro players to figure things out. But at the same time, it's like I don't know why everybody needs to lose their shit on Twitter every time one person says a card is broken. It feels like everybody just follows along and nobody thinks to be like, well, maybe we should like just check our decks and like figure out a way to get around it and then we'll be okay.
Now, I think great players do, and
Mm-hmm.
I will say also there's a lot of incentive to keep things close to the best as well, especially as we head
True.
into national
True.
season. I think like a lot of folks are sort of staying a little bit quieter on ways they have adapted. And there are some really great adaptations going on out there. And it is hard to be a player who like you engage with this as your hobby, but you also don't have time to
Mm-hmm.
like this was my relationship with Magic for a very long time, where like I knew I could be like world class, and in some moments I was, but I was also extremely busy, and like sometimes I just couldn't devote the level of time I needed to figure these things out, and I needed someone else to figure it out, and I needed to just copy what they were doing, and that was how I was able to engage with the game at the moment. And there's many Flesh and Blood players who are in the same boat, and for some people just life has to come first, and I
Mm-hmm.
totally get that. And in those scenarios, you're just like, why can't anyone figure this out? Please give me the keys to sort this out because I am sick of dealing with this card and I just want to play my Azalea deck. And I am empathetic to those folks. That is a tough spot to be in, but I promise you, ebbs and flows will always happen. They will always come, and if they don't, we'll always revisit things. But just a little bit more patience is all I ask for.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things I've noticed is that it feels like just in today's day and age, I think because so many things are so immediate nowadays that whenever there's a problem, people want that just like immediate fix. It's like, no, this stuff
No,
goes at a
it's
slower pace. You got to give it
yeah, it's the
time.
culture. It's the culture of video gaming right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like everything is immediate, patched, DLC.
Yeah.
Like, and that this isn't me like being old man yelling at clouds. I like that. There's a lot of games I play with that same cycle. Teamfight Tactics is a game I play a bunch on a weekly or bi-weekly patch cycle, where I think the game would just actually be really bad if it didn't have that cadence. But not every game needs that cadence. And we are trying to deliver kind of the classic TCG experience. And in order to do that, there needs to be a little grace, a little acceptance that sometimes these metagames are going to take time to churn. You have to let these things develop because they won't happen overnight. And that's just the way these classic TCGs operate. Things don't get patched out, things don't get banned right away. You sometimes have to wait for the next set to release. Sometimes things are just bad and you have to wait 2 years, like an Azalea player, for your deck to be good. And then it's bad again very quickly after that. Like, yes, those things may happen. And I understand it is weird and different, but it's kind of the classic TCG experience. And there's ups and downs with it because those highs are going to be really high
Mm-hmm.
when you call your shot and you say this is the moment for Azalea and Warmongers are down, or I figured out this strategy to beat Warmongers, or they printed a card which allows me to favorably play through Warmongers. Like all these things are very much possibilities, and I hope people have the patience to let these things play out.
Yeah, I hope so too. I mean, I think it's just that people like to complain online, to be honest with you. Like, I think most players are pretty fine with everything. It's just like the small minority who just get upset at like if they have a game where Warmongers blows them out, so they put a tweet like ban Warmongers, or whatever, complain about it. I think it's just a lot of it's just venting frustration because
Yeah.
people love this game.
Yeah, and those approaches always get more engagement too.
Mhm.
Like negativity in general on social media is more apt to be amplified, spread, engaged with, and it feels good to have your social media presence engaged with. Like these apps have all tricked us through chemical addictions in our brain to want that level of engagement, and it's very easy to get trapped in those cycles. So I don't begrudge anyone for like making a tweet about how they hate warmongers. Tweet away, vent away.
Mhm.
I'm just asking to have some broader uh, sense of what we're doing here. And
Mhm.
you can vent all you want, but understand that we're trying to accomplish something. And if it doesn't work out, we will always, always, always revisit things. And I hope we have the faith at this point to be able to do that.
Yeah, and I also just want to quickly add, like, it's perfectly fine to critique something or even complain a little bit. I think if you complain constantly, that's like maybe you should just stop doing that because that's probably not good for you. But just don't like insult the developers or the intelligence of the developers. Like that, I think is where you cross the line of like, listen, these people aren't stupid. Like they might make a mistake, but I guarantee you they can develop a card game better than you can. So I find if it crosses the realm of getting insulting, and questioning like whether developers even read the card, I think can be a bit of a crossing the line.
Yeah, I'll say I think our community is really, really good.
Mm-hmm.
And like the instance you're talking about, I know somebody tweeted that in regards to like Codex of Frailty. They were being tongue in cheek.
Yeah.
And I like fired back at them. So it's another situation where like I could just be like turn the other cheek and not engage that way because I knew they weren't serious and I just kind of like played into it a little bit
Okay.
and tried to have some fun with it. But like I think like on the whole, our player base is so respectful, so good. Like I contrast them with other player bases, just night and day,
Mm-hmm.
just such positive people. I can tell you like the times I've been directly insulted are like one or two, maybe,
Mm-hmm.
which like that still sucks. I don't want to be insulted ever, but like for a developer of a fairly popular game, I think that's actually a pretty low ratio.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
I'm thankful the way people choose to engage with us. They do a really great job of expressing their opinions in 99 out of 100 scenarios. And even when they like do cross lines, I think it's often done tongue in cheek, like not intending to be either condescending or insulting. Just like it's one of those things where you're having conversations with somebody who you've developed a parasocial relationship with, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you joke the way you would with your friends, and
That's true. Yes.
in the moment you're not actually contemplating like, oh, this person doesn't actually know who I am or anything about. It's the same exact scenario I find myself in, right, where I tweet something out that has a bunch of context behind it, but when you engage with this thing you're not getting all that context, and I think we all can lose sight of that because of the way we develop these parasocial relationships. So it just happens, and it's really not a big deal, but on the whole I think the community is like so good and so receptive to what we've been doing. And that's why I feel comfortable doing things like asking for patience and asking for time. Because on the whole, we get it. We get a lot of respect from our player base.
No, I think you guys absolutely deserve it with the amount of work you do. Now I know you have to get going in about 15. Do you have time for two quick questions?
Two quick questions. Let's do
Okay,
it.
so they're from the patrons. The first one, I'm just gonna just so I can actually like properly read them. Okay, the first one's from Dean. He just asked, "Will there ever be two heroes with identical talent and class combinations simultaneously in CC?" So,
Hmm.
like, will there ever be a second Light Warrior that exists alongside Bolton, or will there just be the one? Do you think?
Yeah, it seems possible. There could, I mean, there's going to be a couple mechanologists, right?
True.
Why not do the same with talent class combinations? That seems
Okay.
fine.
Yeah, that's just that I'm good with that because like if we can have another light illusionist alongside Prism and I can play two of them, that's even better.
Yeah, why
So
not?
speaking of illusionists, the next question is from Elixir, one of my best patrons, I'll say. He asked, allies and non-aura items and permanents just in general are something that Fab has done pretty sporadically up until now outside of the illusionist class since it's the hero centric one versus one fighting game. His main question is, how have allies as a whole been received, and what lessons have you learned from the dragons and angels?
I think that we have to choose our spots really carefully, just because of how they interact with the Flesh and Blood game system. Allies do have some complications they bring to the table. They can lead to snowballing games, and I think anyone who has played against a snowballing Prism or a snowballing Dromai knows exactly what I'm talking about. So we have to tread very lightly. That being said, they do offer something exciting, something unique, something that we really like bringing to the table, and it can be quite empowering to have this army of angels at your back and feel like you really have all the options in the world. So we're going to continue to look for opportunities to play with this ally space. But I don't think it should ever be the focal point of Flesh and Blood. I think that would lose a lot of what makes Flesh and Blood special. It needs to be more of an outlier than the default way of interaction. And I think we've done a good job with allies thus far. They've been used appropriately, fairly sparingly, but they feel good when they show up, and I think people appreciate them.
Yeah, I think some people, I mean, obviously they do change the core way the game is played, so some people that aren't as big of fans of them. I think it also, to be honest with Fab, I think it also depends on, like, if you're playing a hero that's bad against Dromai, you're going to hate Dromai because it's like,
Yeah,
it's just bad. Same thing as if, like, when I'm playing Prism, I don't feel that overpowered when I'm facing a Rune Blade, but then I go up against, like, my buddy's Bolton, and I'm just like, oh man, I'm playing Angels down, and, I think you guys really, like, the Dragons felt pretty fair in terms of they have Phantasm, so it's very easy to destroy them, especially with like in Outsiders. You guys gave us so many like 2 for 6s. Down and Dirty is a really good card for being able to just put in the arsenal and then block a dragon. And with the Angels, like it genuinely feels like the way you balance that one out is you can run all the figments, but you're really not going to like if because they don't like as the figments they're not that great unless you're cheating them out. So you want to limit the amount in your deck, meaning that you're not just dropping 18 angels and just having a board state the whole game. It's actually pretty hard to keep them around. You usually flip them and then they get destroyed almost immediately. So I think so far you guys have done a very good job of balancing them so they don't completely destroy the game.
that's good, and that's the vision, right? They're supposed to operate in those spaces. I do think we've done a pretty solid job thus far, and yeah, there'll certainly be more allies in the future. Like it's a very clear part of the game, and we'll look for more opportunities to do it, to lean into it, and to create fun experiences playing with and against them.
Hey, give us a Earth illusionist that lives in a forest and she summons up like elemental creatures from like green anything. I don't care. Just make it look really green, beautiful, and bring me into the depths of a deep forest, and we're good. That's what I would like to
It's-
see.
This is what I mean about like there being infinite places to go with Flesh and
Mm-hmm.
Blood. Like how many cool combinations is it possible to come up with? Like just off the top of my head, I could rattle off like 50 different cool things that we could do,
Absolutely.
and I can't wait to explore them all because
I
there's we have such cool plans coming up for the future, for the near future, for the far future, and I'm just really excited about the state of the game right now, and the growth of the game too, like especially in these burgeoning areas, man, places like Brazil, Japan, like we're just absolutely catching fire in these places, and it's so exciting to see the game really just completely go global. And I think I can't wait for World Championships this year. I can't wait for them next year as the game just gets bigger and bigger, and
mhm.
it becomes this celebration of all these different countries coming together. You enter the venue to a cacophony of languages just all over the place, and man, that's exactly what James wants to deliver. It's what I want to deliver, and we're getting ever closer to that goal. So it's really cool to see.
That's amazing to hear. I couldn't agree more with literally everything you said. This game has been such a life changer for so many people. It lets you meet so many people. It was the first time I really went out and properly traveled. So it has been just a wonderful experience, and I'm so excited to see where it goes. And I'm glad to hear that the sky's not falling and the game's not on its way out within the next couple months. So
No, we're good, man. We're gonna be around for a long time. Get
I'm
used to us.
very glad to hear that. So, anyways, thank you, Brian, so much for coming on. I hope you had a good time. If you did and you're willing to come on again, I'd love to get you back on, maybe around
Oh,
Bright
absolutely.
Lights or
Yeah,
so.
I'm sure
So,
we'll do this again.
yeah, I'm sure you enjoy gushing about the sets you've helped design when they come out. So once you're able to like
Dude,
actually
I
fully
love what I
talk about
do.
it,
I
so
love what I do. I love talking about it. Like I am very blessed to be in this position, and I'm always happy to talk flesh and blood.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much. And I know you got to get going, so I will let you go on your merry way. And I hope everybody enjoyed this, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye. If you liked this video and wanted to support me, consider checking out my Patreon. There's extra bonuses like Talishar card sleeves, early access to videos, and even your own GigaChad card. And to those who are already supporting me, you have my undying thanks. It's because of Chads like you that I can continue to do what I do. So please, stay Chadly, my friends.